Welcome to 144,000 teachers, their first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. In day number 7, we are learning to preserve food through canning. And this is a wonderful picture of someone who has worked really hard in canning vegetables as well as fruits, grain such as corn, beets, carrots. You can see many beautiful prepared food in order to preserve life, and it's called simple survival canning. As we look at the table of contents, we will be studying what is canning, the benefit of canning foods for your survival, material you'll need for the canning process, types and method in canning, what foods work best in canning, tips on sterilizing your work area for the best result, and storing your long-term survival. What is canning? Canning was a way of preserving food back when there were no refrigerators to be found. The French were actually the first to preserve food or can it back in the 1800s, and hence the name canning. People who lived on farms had to have a way of ensuring that what they grew in their gardens or in the fields would be able to sustain them for the winter and beyond. They had to have a way of preserving this food, and canning was born. Canning is a process that is really not done with cans. The correct way to can is in mason jars, which are glass. You cook and seal the food into the jars so that there are no bugs, pests, microorganisms, or anything else that wants to grow in the jar and will get in and spoil the food. This is the same concept that the big food makers in modern times use, except that they actually do use cans. That is why canned foods have a long shelf life. The food industry uses this process to can things such as vegetables, soups, potted meats, fruit, beans, and more. If you grow a garden and are fortunate enough to have a large field with a variety of vegetables, you can preserve the food and know that you are canning it with all the good taste and quality of homegrown food. You will have to purchase the jars, the seals, a large jar boiling pot, and other various supplies in order to can. Once you can the food, they say it can be stored for approximately a year. Even if you don't have a garden, a field of vegetables or fruit trees, you can go to your local grocery store and buy these same items and can them as if you grew them. The process is the same. You just bought the food instead of growing it. Benefit of canning food for your survival. Canning your own food can be very rewarding. When you can, you are actually taking the steps as your ancestor did to assure your survival. There is a certain sense of pride when you finish all of your canning to look at what you have accomplished. You will have a peace of mind knowing that it will mean to survival if and it becomes necessary. So, what are some of the benefits of canning? The obvious is your food supply if and when you need it. So here you have a nice food supply. And when the grocery store no longer gets shipments because trucks are not coming to resupply the stores, what are you going to do? Do not be left out in the cold or without a food supply. Canning is easy once you get the hang of it, and can be kind of fun if you get the family involved to accomplish the task together. It will go faster, and they may even want to help the next time. If you grow a backyard garden, plant in the fields, or have a bountiful amount of fruit, this is a great way to preserve the food. And you have your own personal stash and know that you grew your own food, and what you have stored it away. There is a certain amount of personal satisfaction as well that comes with knowing you did this on your own. Want to make jellies and jams as well? This sounds old-fashioned, but this is what your great-grandmother, maybe even your grandmother, did for their families. For the prepper, you want to make sure that you have enough of all the types of items you will need to survive for a few months or a year. You might need to trade food items, so it is always good to have extra of anything you can. Maybe you didn't think to preserve jellies or jams, and your neighbor did. Maybe your neighbor didn't preserve vegetables or fruits. Bargaining will become a necessity in the future when the power goes off. This applies to not only long-term disaster, but short-term disaster as well. Canning is relatively inexpensive. All you need are either your own grown items or items you brought from the store, plus your time, ingredients, and jars. Look for the mason jars at your local grocery store, online, or at the larger food warehouse type markets. Material you'll need for the canning process. You're going to need certain pieces of equipment to can. You cannot think that you are just going to be boiling water in jars and throwing some food in them. So obviously you need an oven, stove, a pressure canner, and you can purchase a small, medium, or large canner depending on your preference. Some of the larger model will load up to 7 jars. Canning rack. The rack will fit down into the canner and keep the jars an even distance from one another. This will also prevent them from moving around as the water boils during the pressure heating process. You need to have a canning jars as well. The prime type of jars are mason jars. So those mason jars are glass and come in a variety of sizes with a metal plate and band that screw onto the jar. The jar can withstand extreme heat. The seal will keep your food fresh for up to 12 months. The jar ranges in size from about 4 ounces to a quart. Before using any of the jars, check to make sure there is no crack, chips, or broken glass anywhere on the jar. That being said, do not attempt to use previous jars which contained other items you bought at the store such as mayonnaise, pickles, etc. You can only use a lid once. You need a funnel. The funnel will assist you in getting whatever it is that you have cooked into the jars without making a huge mess. You do not want to waste one precious drop of the food you have just prepared. The funnel is especially helpful if you are canning liquid or sauce. You need a jar lifter. This contraption, as you can see here, looks like a large set of tongs, but it is made to withstand the heat and to grab the large size of the jars. You need also a timer, which is necessary as canning is a precise art. You cannot overcook or undercook the food. It has to be cooked just right. Be sure to read and become educated on correct cooking times for canning foods. You will also need measuring bowls, clear gel, food strainer, plastic spatulas, candy thermometer, labels, just to name a few items. Again, you can purchase all of these items online, or you most likely already have some of the kitchen items. No need to buy new if you already have these items. So this is a good inventory for us to get us starting and be able to do a very good job at canning. Now we're going to look at the type and methods of canning. There are a few types of canning, so we'll give you a brief explanation of some of the methods here. Do not get bogged down if you have never touched a canning jar in your life. It is easier than it appears. The first method is hot water canning, which means putting the jars in a large pot on the stove and letting the jars take a nice boiling water bath, a water bath canner. You can use this method for cooking high acid food. You want the water to boil at a minimum of 212 degrees Fahrenheit. You can convert to Celsius if that's the method you use. Pressure canning is the opposite of hot water. So that we saw here, we saw the hot water canning. Now we're looking at pressure canning, and it's used for low acid food. This one was used for the high acid food. This one is low. The water for this type of canning needs about 240 degrees Fahrenheit at a minimum. So where the other one was 212. Also, you have another method called cold pack canning, which is the process of taking uncooked foods or vegetable and placing them in canning jars. The cold pack canning requires you to fill the jar with hot water and then heat process it. The items are placed in the jars at room temperature as the hot water is poured over the contents. The jars are then placed in your canner cooker to preserve the contents rather than cook them. With the cold pack method, not only can you put fruits or vegetable into the jar, you can also store meat, fish, and seafood, only if it is pickled or cooked first. Hot pack canning is putting foods that have already been cooked into your jars. This is the method used for common canning that you have probably heard over the years. This method is used to store stews, broth, pie, filling, jellies, jams, and soups. After you put these cooked food into the jars, you then proceed with the water bath or hot water canning method. There are 4 types of canners. Water bath canner. This pot is used to boil and seal your canning jars. Any large pot that will fit the size of your jar will work. Make sure a canning rack can fit into the pot, again, so that the jar do not move during the boiling. Pressure canner. This type of canner uses steam to push all the air out of the canner. The steam and the water in the canner are used to reach the high temperatures which is needed to kill harmful bacteria. So this is a very important procedure. And then when we look at other methods such as dial gauge canner, this is exactly as it states. There is a dial gauge to read the pressure in the pot. Be sure to set the pressure correctly to can your items also correctly. Then there is the weighted gauge canner. This type of canner comes in your choice of 10 to 15 pounds pressures. There is a gauge on the pot that rocks or jiggles to keep the pressure properly maintained. Lots of details. You may want to revise it by yourself. That's why we have given you the PDF format that you can go back and read again for better instruction and understanding what you're doing. You may want also to watch the videos that we have submitted of canning. It's a short video again, but it's very instructive. Or if you know someone in the family or friends that knows how to do canning, just ask them for a lesson or two, and then you will be okay. You will be able to do your canning yourself. Now, what foods work best in canning? Most of the items that people think of canning are vegetable. Did you know, though, that you can also can fruits and meats? The canned items that you buy at the store can be stored safely for up to 5 years under optimal conditions. By optimal conditions, we mean an average temperature of 60 degrees along with the storage area containing a minimal amount of light. So the 60 degrees, it's when everything has been prepared and it's to preserve it. Canning and storing your own food requires the same optimal space. The last thing you want to happen is for you to take all the time and efforts to can your own food only to find out that you didn't store it properly after canning. So now we're going to look at the list of some popular foods you can can. And we again ask you to revise this because we will not read all of those sentences, but you will see how important it is as you prepare yourself. So tomato, can be uh, canned soup, which is very interesting. Again, you have to keep them in mason jars, and that will last up to a year. And they're very easy to prepare. As you can see, the beautiful jar all filled up here. Fruits, this also can be preserved just like your grandparents have done. And you can also do jellies or jams, as well as beans. Bean can be preserved in mason jar. Sauces, so you can make a nice sauce and preserve that as well. Vegetables, which are the staple of survival life. You can store practically any vegetable and keep it on the shelf for up to a year. And another list can be green beans, squash, corn, cabbage, pickle. You can use every inch of your garden or purchase this item from the store to keep you and your family supplied with vegetable to add to any of your meals during survival mode. Now, tips on sterilizing your work area for the best result. Sterilizing your work area for canning is probably the single most item you need to ensure before you even start thinking about canning. So sterilizing is very, very important. Any germs, microgerms, and bacteria can creep into your food jars, and then you will become sicker than you can imagine. So you don't want food that is not sterilized properly. So here we have the first thing you want is to clean all the surfaces where you will be preparing the food. Make sure that your countertops, cutting boards, sink, pans, utensils you will be using for canning are clean and sterile. Cutting boards and countertops contain numerous germs that are just waiting to cling to something. You can use Clorox or another disinfectant to clean the counters. There are also disinfectant wipes. Anything that will ensure you are starting with a clean area is the goal here. Boil your pots and jars before using them to make sure there is no germ hiding out. This is very important. Boiling them will ensure a clean, well-prepared item. These are steps that you cannot skip if you want to ensure your survival. Can you imagine opening a can, serving the food only to find out that it was tinted because of not taking the time to boil everything before using it? And boiling it will sterilize that jar before you put the food in it. So put your empty jars in a large pot, boil them, let them cool before removing. The pot you boil the jar in will probably be the same pot you use to boil the jar once they are filled with your food items. Let the jar boil for about 15 minutes. Turn off the heat. Do not leave the jars in the water no longer than an hour. If you do happen to run over an hour, you will need to boil them again. Do not boil the canning lids. The canning lids have an adhesive ring, and the last thing you want to do is to harm this lid. Instead of sticking the lids in the pot when the jars are boiling, place them in the water about the time you are turning off the heat for the jars that are boiling. You cannot take too much time and effort in preparing your work area or your items you will be using to can. Skip over this step and you are not going to like the consequences. So we're talking sterilizing. Very important. Now, storing your long-term survival items. There are several items that you need to think about storing for long-term survival besides food. And I think we have covered what you need to do to ensure that you know how to can food. The last thing you need to know how to do is to store it. The first rule to remember when storing food is rotate it in and out until disaster strikes. Some food have a limited shelf life, and you don't want to be stuck with a bunch of rotten food when you think you have put food away to last for weeks or months. Even though some of the food you have stored may not spoil, it might lose some of its nutritional or flavor value. You do not want to be eating food that tastes old or stale. We touched on a couple of these methods earlier, just briefly, but we will go into a little more depth here to round out your canning and storage in those food. So this is what's very important right now. And although it's not a long booklet, it's only 17 pages, it's full of really, really important and interesting ways and methods. So you want to take time to read it again. And these can all be copied as well. They're PDF. So just simply put them on a USB and copy them if you like a hard copy in order to read and take notes. In-ground storage. Naturally storing food is certainly a viable solution. Do not pick everything in your garden, but leave some items to be stored naturally. Root vegetables such as carrot, parsnip, lettuce, cabbage, turnips can be left in the ground. If winter strikes, cover them with dried leaves, straw, or mulch. You can dig them up when you need them. A root cellar. The most important aspect of a root cellar is to keep your food fresh at a very cool and slightly moist environment. This is actually part of a root cellar where you can keep your canned food and the food that can be kept without having to can it. The squash, and as you can see there, lots of vegetable. It's beautiful. Root cellars work best in areas where wintertime is the harshest. You can store fruits, vegetable in the root cellar to the wintertime. And it is best if there is a dirt floor. Your basement won't do because it is too warm and dry. 5-gallon containers. Large 5-gallon containers can be purchased at your local home improvement store. Stack the jars inside the container with bubble wrap or other conduit to absorb any movement of the jar. Dry crawl space. Do you have an area under your stairs where you could build a small door opening? Store foods in this space as it is excellent for dry storage. Do not put food in the attic. An attic can get extremely cold in the summertime. Hot in the summertime and rot the food. And then the reverse is also true. I guess I'm thinking about freezing too in the attic. It can get very cold as well, so it's hard to control in the attic the temperature. A shed. This will only work if it's climate controlled, the same as the attic. Again, you can't put foods where the temperature is going to be one extreme or the other, very hot or very cold, just like the attic. Your canned food are going to need a steady, cool temperature in order to stay protected. Again, you can use 33-gallon trash can. You read that right. Some people dig holes in their property and store foods in the large trash receptacle you can purchase at the store. Make sure that the bottom of the barrel is 3 feet under the surface grade level. Only leave an inch or two above ground so you can put the lid back on. Try to find a shaded area to bury the cans. This is really canning food for survival. And we hope that you will go back to this booklet and read for yourself. And again, you have YouTubes that you can look into to make sure you're doing it properly. The suggestion is start with small quantities and check them out in a week or two and see how they're doing. And if they have not changed in color, that means they're sealed properly. And perhaps, like they say, you have to rotate what you have done in order to be sure that it works, they're working well. And make sure also to date them. Put a date on it always. Also to remember what it is in case, just put the name and the date when you have canned that food. So this is a quite interesting lesson and many details, and we hope that you have enjoyed it. And may the Lord bless you as you prepare the food that could be simply for family in the winter, but also for survival when more important event occurs and we do not know what it could be. May the Lord bless you and cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace always.